Deputy President Paul Mashatile has used his maiden question and answer session in Parliament to defend President Cyril Ramaphosa. Opposition parties didn't take too long to pounce on Mashatile over how Parliament is handling the Phala Phala theft matter. They say the ANC is using its majority to shield the president from accountability. This is just a day after the ANC voted against the DA motion to establish an ad hoc committee to further probe what transpired on the president's farm. Let's speak now to political analyst Lukhanyo Vanqua, who will help us analyze Mashatile's responses. Lukhanyo, good morning and thank you very much for your time. A very interesting maiden Q&A. We heard, among others, how majority rules and that the ANC has every right to use its majority to push for whatever it believes in. What did you make of that session?
Good morning, Vundo, and good morning to the viewers. Yes, it was a smooth sailing Q&A session, and this is because it's parliamentary tradition to be kind to those that are giving their maiden speeches in Parliament, and the Deputy President was giving his maiden speech. So there wasn't any heckling that we saw, which is, sort of what is reserved for the other members of the executive. So unfortunately as well, Vundo, I must say that the ANC MPs tend to take that kid gloves approach to the executive way beyond their maiden speeches, and that becomes a permanent feature in how they treat the executive. And I hope somehow Parliament will be able to strengthen those processes. He fielded some questions from the MPs, some of them more difficult than the others. He also fielded some sweetheart questions from members of his own party as well. And I think he responded quite adequately to the questions. But also another challenge of our parliamentary process and the accountability mechanisms that we have, Fundo, is that sometimes these members of the executives can be repetitive in their questions. Paul Mashatile was rereading some of the answers that he had given before to follow-up questions. He was giving a lot of generalities and some platitudes as well, and just political speak, as Ramaphosa would say. So that's some of the challenges that we have with our accountability mechanisms when it comes to those Q&A sessions. They're not as robust as they need to be to ensure that there's proper accountability.
But his response around the whole notion of majority rules when quizzed on Phala Phala and the inability for Parliament to establish that ad hoc committee, it seems to have caught the attention of many. Just his analysis of what democracy means, that democracy at the heart of it is about majority rules. It does indeed mean majority rules, but nevertheless, there's more, because in instances you could have the majority voting to shield a particular leader even in other countries. What did you make of just that? Will it not get him into a lot of hot water?
Yes, I think his political understanding of what South Africa's dispensation is a bit problematic, and is misunderstood what we are. We're not really a democracy, we're a republic. We're a democratic republic. So it's not ruled by majority or ruled by numbers. We are ruled by law, where we have a constitutional supremacy in the country. And therefore, it doesn't mean that whenever the majority decides on something, that is going to be what's correct. And I think Paul Mashatile will learn with, getting into the gear of things, being in Parliament, that sometimes he must take his iron fist and put it in a velvet glove so that it doesn't appear to be as majoritarian as he sounded yesterday. This notion that because we have the numbers, therefore that might makes right, and he's going to learn that that's not necessarily the case.
But he's not new to politics. With the benefit of hindsight, everybody followed what happened at the Concourt when it came to Nkandla. They all know what was stated. Even with the Zondo Commission, it was stated that it cannot be that parliamentarians will use a majority to push a completely different agenda. Leaders must be held accountable. So with the benefit of hindsight, would just that type of a statement to emphasize that majority rules in today's country, a constitutional democracy, I mean, surely that was ill-advised.
Very ill-advised, and that's exactly as you're saying. There's enough legal precedents. The Concourt has ruled on these issues that because you have a majority doesn't mean you can run roughshod over the constitution, over the rule of law. So Paul Mashatile isn't new, to politics, but I think is relatively new to national politics. He only became a national leader in the ANC in 2017, so he's been there for about 5 or 6 years now. I think about 5 years. So he hasn't really had to deal with these issues of constitutionalism at the level of national politics. I don't think there's any constitutional making or lawmaking that happens a lot in legislatures, and that's where he spent most of his time. At national government, he was merely a deputy minister, and I don't think he was intimately involved in those processes. But be that as it may, it's not an excuse for some of the for that utterance that he made yesterday. It was ill-advised, and I think he should retract that because of the numbers that they have in Parliament. They could be able to do anything that they want, even if it's unconstitutional or it offends the principles of legality.
Mm-hmm. And then just on his tenure now, he's just started. There were those that were hoping that he would be a deputy who distinguishes himself from the president and possibly at times be somebody that even opposition could rely on when they want to hold the president accountable. Politically, though, would this be advisable where you have a second in command that wants to distinguish himself from the president?
Well, not inside the way the ANC functions, because the ANC functions as sects and factions. So if you're in the certain faction that belongs to the president or you want their support, then you cannot be able to challenge their men or distinguish yourself in any particular way from that person. And I think Paul Mashatile is kept in the same vein. There's nothing interesting or new that he said yesterday that would distinguish himself as bringing a fresh brim of ideas or a fresh breath air into that position. He spoke in the similar vein that the former deputy president, D.T. Mabuza, spoke, and I think it deferred a lot to D.T. Mabuza as well, and you can see that it's going to continue that legacy. But sometimes with the way that the ANC leaders function, Fundo, is that they keep very close to the president until the very last minute, when they're either now proposing themselves as alternatives to the president at the national conference, or when they see that the president is wounded and they want to bring themselves to the fore as a viable alternative to them. And that's when they break away and they speak in their own voice. And you see, we saw that with Cyril Ramaphosa as well. For over 5 years, he spoke and defended President Zuma in Parliament, defended him on Gandla, defended him on state capture, on the Gupta family. But in the last year or so, that's the only time that he spoke out, and he said the same thing at the Zondo Commission. And you remember Zondo chastised him very severely for that, the fact that he didn't raise his voice sooner. But that's what they do. When it's politically expedient, then they find their voice.
Mm-hmm. But many are not letting him live past that moment, because they're constantly saying you were part of the problem. In most instances, if the country or the economy is in the state it's in now, you were part of the problem because you sat silently and waited for an opportune moment to then raise your hand and say, perhaps I could be an alternative. So is it really beneficial to go that route?
And that's the same criticism that will be inherited by Paul Mashatile should you continue with that tradition of the ANC that you only speak out when it's politically expedient to you. So I think he might want to consider how it's fared for President Cyril Ramaphosa. Yes, it got him the presidency because he bided his time. He played the whatever long game it's referred to. But when he became president, he still inherited some of the problems of his predecessor because he was part and parcel of that leadership course. So Paul Mashatile will now have to make that decision, as you say, as you're asking, is it worth it? He must make those computations and calculations whether or not it's worth it for him to play a second fiddle to President Ramaphosa, or he should stand up as in his own right, as his own man with his own ideas and how to take the country forward and play that role of deputy president the best way he knows how.
Lukhanyo, thank you very much for your time this morning. That was political analyst Lukhanyo Vanqua.